Here you will see the preliminary design for the McGrath campus. Next, we have the preliminary design for the Mark Twain campus. In addition to looking great, the new building entryways will feature a double entrance visitor management system that will allow school staff to carefully monitor all visitors, helping to make our buildings as secure as possible. Dedicated STEM labs will provide students with access to hands-on science, technology, engineering, and math learning in order to meet modern curriculum needs and keep all Brentwood students prepared and competitive for their future careers. The building designs will feature flexible learning spaces throughout the building to provide teachers with the opportunity to maximize space and develop dynamic and engaging lessons that allow for student pullouts and project-based learning activities. A modern library not only provides the space students and teachers need to learn, it also provides the opportunity to have a dedicated makerspace and other collaborative spaces for students. Updated gymnasium facilities help ensure students are able to meet their physical education needs while providing the school with an important community space. For more information on Prop E, please visit our website at brentwoodmoschools.org. So, and you're going to hear me say this several times tonight, in terms of the design process, those are very conceptual. So if you liked it, great. If you didn't, that's okay too, because the way this would work is, assuming that Proposition E passes, then we will go through a comprehensive, it's going to be a little over a year-long process that would involve community stakeholders, it would involve staff members, it obviously involves our architects, and that will go through, similar to what we did with the high school and middle school, it's going to go through many, many different iterations, so we will really identify what people like about those designs, what they'd like to see changed about those designs. So I guess what I'm really saying is you know, don't feel that these are finished by any stretch. These are just to give you an idea of what these buildings could look like. Now, going through the process though, there are going to be some non-negotiables that we are going to promise and deliver on when we say things like accessibility, when we talk about the secure entryways, when we talk about our science labs, improved classroom spaces, and all those other things. Those will be in the design regardless of how that goes through the process. So let's start a little bit with a timeline. This has been a process that's been in place now for a while. The district has realized for many years that they had facility needs. When you have buildings that range anywhere from 1920s to 1960s, you realize they are not meeting the needs of your teachers and students. So the discussion really began in earnest back in 2013. This is before my time, but basically they started the process, and then they realized that there were some other more pressing financial needs for the district, so they really had to put that on hold at that time. For those of us who were around, that's when they pursued Proposition K, which rectified things on the operations side of the budget. So that occurred at that time. And then slightly prior to when I came in a few years ago, they had started the process up again to really study what needs to happen. And at that point, they were looking at the both elementaries and the middle school and high school. I became part of that process about the 6 months into it, and took that over. And we had a large facilities committee that took a look at that. Ultimately, what we found was that there were needs across the district. There were significant needs at the middle school, high school, and there were significant needs both at McGrath and Mark Twain. Ultimately, those needs were larger than the bonding capacity of the district at the time. So at that point, it was a board decision that we would break this into 2 phases. So we have phase 1, which is ongoing right now. Hopefully a few of you were able to come out to our gym open house on Monday night and see that project's coming along beautifully, really changing the middle school, high school. And now, as promised, we're coming back at this point for phase 2 to address the elementary needs. How this played out, I should have mentioned that a key thing on there was for us to be able to do the middle school, high school project. It took the support of the Brentwood community, and they came out at the rate of 89% approval and have done what they've historically done, which is supported the public schools. So then at this point, we have had an elementary phase 2 facilities committee. This committee, which I'm going to recognize here in a second, put in a lot of work over a year's time period to look at the question that had arisen in the community, which was, should we have 2 elementary schools or 1 elementary school? They looked at many different components to this decision, and ultimately what they really were finding is that both options were viable in this community. Then what happened was we did a district survey, and it found that there were concerns of whether the 2-school option could pass in an election. So that ultimately kind of changed the direction of their work. Ultimately, that group was really just getting into those discussions, finally to the point of 2 versus 1. There were many people on there. While their recommendation ultimately was for 1, I can tell you there were many people on the committee that actually had preference for the 2-school option. They were just concerned about the ability to ultimately pass that. So once that committee came out, and as you know, they spoke to the recommendation for the 1-school option, we had a large contingent of community members, such as yourself, many that are here tonight, that were really galvanized by this and came out strongly, both in email, to our community forum that we held, to multiple board meetings, and spoke out strongly for their support for the 2-school option. Many people felt it had many advantages. It's what makes Brentwood, and was something that they really wanted to hold on to. Ultimately, the board made the decision that they wanted to listen to those voices and in our community, and the best way of listening and the highest form of democracy was to place something on the ballot. And that is why we placed Proposition E on the April 7th ballot, and that is where we're at right now. Quick recognition of those people that had that tough job on that on the Phase 2 Facilities Committee to make those tough decisions. It's very important to us that we always go back to our mission, vision, and values as we're making these decisions. And I think as you look at those, you can see many ways that a 2-school elementary option does support our mission and vision for the school district. When we look at words, looking at seeing each child's individual pathways, when we talk about a personalized and dynamic education, I think many people could see the connection that we can make by having the opportunity to have 200 students at a school and to have all those personal relationships that we have with between our teachers and students and administrators and students and families. So we did a survey and asked our parents, this was coming out of the community forum, what did they feel our needs were? And I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see, you're going to see a lot of common themes emerge. Accessibility is a key one. That was a need that we've now been able to address, we'll be able to address in our middle school, high school. It is a key need at both of our elementary schools. We have many students with disabilities, and we have many parents and community members with disabilities that currently cannot access, certainly cannot fully access our facilities. We have aging lifts, sometimes take 10 to 15 minutes to get students up a small stairwell. It's just, it's very outdated for our current needs. You'll see other things on here. Security is obviously foremost in many of our minds, including mine in this day and time. So to be able to have a system, and you saw a little bit of that on the video, where we would have a visitor management system where first off people would be buzzed into a foyer area. At that point they're going to have to put their ID into a system, checks it against hundreds of databases. Then and only then does the secretary have the ability to buzz that person into the office, so they would have no access into our students before going through that process. Flexible learning spaces, modern classrooms, STEM and maker spaces, science labs. The real point I want to make, this is not just about getting new buildings. The issues with our current buildings cannot be rectified with a coat of paint or new tiles. This is the fact that our teachers want and need to teach our students in different ways to prepare them to compete in this global economy, and our current buildings do not support that. Our buildings were, they were built, and when you're built in the 1920s, 1950s, you're built for the Industrial Revolution. You were built the way many of us were taught, in rows, closely packed rows of students with the teachers up there lecturing. What it does not support is the way that we need to teach and learn today, where students are collaborating, where they're building projects together, where they are actively engaged throughout the day. Here's the areas that people felt were our highest needs in terms of their dissatisfaction. You can see many of the same things come up. You can also see the specialist areas were concerning for many of our parents and community members. Overall, top needs. This is very helpful to us because you're always going to prioritize in these projects as you go through that design process. So you can see once again a lot about the learning spaces, a lot about flexibility for those spaces, safety, security, all in the top. Here's a word cloud, and because at the end of that survey we just asked open-ended question about what people would like to see in our elementary facilities. So you can see some of those that really popped on that, and they're similar, and this also helps to kind of drive our conversation with the architects and with that design committee. So here's the average age of Mark Twain and McGrath. I think it's important. You might hear some people say, well, did they keep, why didn't they keep the buildings up? I can tell you that I've looked back historically, and these buildings, there have been money put into these. It has not been a matter of negligence. Now, over the long-term span of those, I'm sure there were some years that the district put more into it than other times. But when you look at the buildings, it's not a matter of we can replace roofs. You can't raise roofs. You cannot change technology infrastructure in a building. If you go over to our buildings and you see the technology is underneath the ceilings because there's nowhere to go into those. When you have small classrooms, there's no way to make them larger. The only thing you can do is have less classrooms that would be twice as long and narrow. So there are so many examples that you can give. It's just not a matter of these not being kept up. It is a matter of very old buildings that no longer match how we want to educate students. So now I'm going to turn this over to Greg Goebel, Todd Powers. They work with Ittner. And so what we're going to do tonight, there's going to be many other opportunities where we'll bring Ittner around, and on those nights we'll do more of a question and answer kind of format. Tonight is really just to give you kind of a flavor of what the design could potentially look like. And Greg wanted me to reiterate once again that these are not completed designs. These are just ideas. But he's put some work into them, and so if he can take us through that, I think it'd be helpful for us all. Greg?
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that the point of the things you're about to see was not to create a complete design for either of the schools, but rather to give the leadership of the district ideas about the choices they had to make and what the ramifications of those choices were. And I'll say that with the decision to proceed with 2 schools, you have a lot of flexibility that's going to serve the needs well. And the biggest of them is that the 2 sites are 4 and 5 acres respectively, and that's big enough to do what they do now, but to put either of them onto one site would have created pressures in either neighborhood it was landed in. And so the decision to go forward with 2 removes some of those pressure points and will allow us to upgrade either of the 2 schools in many different ways that will result in something we can all be proud of. I live here in the district as well, so it's something I'm looking forward to participating in. The first thing is that, and it won't be obvious until I show you some of this, but the McGrath site looks like it's all full of building. And the reason is because everything in that building is 1 story. There's no 2-story components. It just spreads all over the site. So the new building is going to have a number of 2-story components in it. And what that means is that the footprint of the building will get smaller. So instead of looking at as tight and compressed as it does now, and the way the parking works now, there's really not quite enough parking and the site circulation is a little constricted. We're going to have a lot more site to work with. So the parking counts are going to go up. The site circulation is going to get better. The building will be more compressed. There'll be more green space, more trees, more play areas for the kids outside as well. So what you can see here is speaks to what I just said, which is, and by the way, the scheme you're seeing here was the one where we were looking at putting all of the classrooms required into one building. So there's a wing back here in the back that's actually part of something that isn't necessary. So we're going to get a big field in the back that's as large as the one that's there now, as well as additional space in the front of the building for either play areas or just green space. More parking. It'll take some of the pressure of moving in and out of the site, out of the building and out of the site. And so I think the people that live close by are going to have some improvements made in terms of how disruptive the school sometimes is. It's going to get better with this new scheme. The next one I'm going to show you is not as polished as this one, but it speaks to the process that we're going through. And the process never stops. You don't get to a space and say, well, this is it, everything's figured out. We continue to turn things over again and again to make improvements throughout the process, and that will continue even as we speak. When they're working on the middle school and the high school, we're continuing to refine things in the building even now. So at the end of the day, we're not trapped by a decision that was made early on in the process when we learn new information that means we can do something better. So what I'm going to share with you right now, and this is not a design, but what it speaks to is that after the fact that the decision was made to have 2 schools, we went back and revisited the plan that we had put together initially for here on the Mark Twain site. And what this represents is that early on, we had accepted that we weren't going to put anything on top of the existing field. But we've had subsequent conversations where we determined that if we did use part of the field, we could take pressure off the building, make the new work more easy to do and more cost effective. And what that allows us to put more money into the building rather than manipulating the site. So in this scheme, what you can see is a lot of the gray stuff back here is all the existing building, but we're inserting a whole lot of new things and new spaces. As Brian had said, the new classrooms are not proportionally consistent with the old ones. They're bigger, they're more open, there's more of a dialogue from one space to the next. So we need to build new stuff in order to make that happen, but we want to go back and then reutilize the old stuff as well. This scheme will allow us to do what we call, as an architect, if you want to put an addition onto the house, the most expensive addition you can do is one that touches the entire outside of the building. The more things you disrupt on the building, the more you have to go back and patch to match afterwards. So So if we do a lighter touch on the building, that means more money goes into the new construction and less into repairing what you've messed up and doing the work. So this scheme is reflecting a movement down onto the field where we're gonna break that piece of new construction a little bit more apart from the existing stuff and let us be more efficient about it. And you'll get a better school as a result with more of that money going back into materials inside the building. So it's not as polished as the other one, but it sort of speaks to what we're up to, which is add a whole bunch of new real estate to get all those spaces that you need upgraded. And the white band that goes through the middle here is about connecting. For those of you that haven't been in that building, it's multiple levels, and it's really hard to get from one place in the building to another without going up and down stairs. We're gonna insert a new elevator. There'll be a couple ramps in there, but the bottom line is when we get done with our work, everything in that building will be accessible through a central opening and area that's gonna be open and airy and inviting. And for those of you that like the garden space like I do, we're gonna offset the garden into a space a little bit further back. It'll be located somewhere along the way to the playground that's gonna be in the back corner of the site. And so some of those features that we all like about the school will remain in what we do, but we're gonna improve upon it and fix a lot of those internal circulation problems that I've mentioned. That's sort of an overview of where we're at on both of them. And is there anything else you'd like me to cover?
No, I think that was a great 30,000.
30,000.
30,000.
30,000.
Flyover. So one thing before I get into the financials that I want to emphasize, there's been some questions in terms of a little bit on the timeline. What would this look like? First off, as we know, the election would be in April, so we'd spend roughly about 14 to 15 months in that design process. So that is going to involve, like I said, many community members, staff members on that design process. During that process, then we'd also be bidding the project out, choosing the contractors for that, and then ultimately where you'd be looking to break ground is right around the summer of the following year. And the project itself would take roughly a year and a half to 2 years to complete. You're going to need, it's really going to play out very similar to our current high school, middle school project and exactly how that played out. Certainly an advantage that Greg talked about a little bit is on both of these projects, you would have more of a luxury of not having to have the work nearly touch the environment nearly as much as at the high school, middle school. By its very nature, we put as much work at the high school, middle school as we can in the summer, but we are still dealing with the logistical challenges of trying to have school while construction takes place. On both the McGrath and the Mark Twain sites, you're going to have much less of that touching the sites and much less of a disruption to the learning environment, and certainly much less than we would have had trying to build one consolidated school on one of those sites. In terms of how these schools will both be as they are now, just to be clear, they're going to both be K through 5 elementary schools. Similar concept that we have right now, which, as you know, has been very successful for the district. That being said, one of the key things that we're looking for out of this design is flexibility. So what that means is that, let's assume enrollment goes up. We know that some of our houses are getting turned over in the district and larger homes are being built. We believe that we'll continue to attract more and more of our private school citizens to the district, so both of these buildings will be built with that capability that we can increase enrollment over the next X amount of years and absorb that. They'll also have the flexibility in the design that you recently heard the board discuss the idea of at some point down the road would we want to consider moving early childhood to one or perhaps both of the buildings. Or you could look at things like having a satellite locations of early childhood at the locations as our capacity continues to increase, because our early childhood center does a great job. So those would all be possibilities with this design that this would open up to us, so that there could be a point down the road where we would look at those possibilities, or we would potentially consider, if it made financial sense several years down the road in terms of selling off this building and moving the early childhood out to one or both of the sites in the district. We'd have the ability to do that. That's all going to be built into this design, that those possibilities would be there. We're trying to future-proof this and think far beyond our time in terms of people utilizing these facilities and superintendents down the road not talking bad about me and the decisions that I made. So let's look at the financial picture, and all these charts and graphs and everything, this are also linked to on our website, so I'd ask you to take a look at those. So overall, where are we in terms of the tax picture? This is good information not only for you, but hopefully to share with your neighbors or on social media if there's any misinformation out there. We are currently ranked in the bottom third, as you see, in St. Louis County. We're currently 17th out of 23rd when you look at the overall tax rate. So what happens if we are able to pass Proposition E? That moves us into 11th. So we're firmly in the middle of the pack of St. Louis County, even with that additional 47 cents added to your tax levy. Now let's take a look at it. It's also good to see the overall context and maybe why some of these districts fall where they do. It's not because, let's look up there, it's very small print, but you would see that Jennings actually has the highest tax rate in St. Louis County. I can assure you it's not because Jennings is spending the most money per pupil. It's unfortunately that in that area, their properties, both commercial and residential, do not generate much money. So that means for every penny of that tax levy, it generates a considerably less money than many of these other districts that are on the list. So when you take a look at this next slide, and it's interesting to see a few outliers on here, and it kind of gives you context. Some certainly make sense. You see that the top four districts, Parkway, Rockwood, Melville, and Hazelwood, well, those are the four largest school districts in St. Louis County. It certainly makes sense their assessed valuation would be the highest. Then you start getting into some outliers, for instance, Ladue, Kirkwood, our neighbors Clayton is number 9. And what that means is, for instance, while Clayton is a small school district, as we all know, they have a lot of businesses, and so they're generating $1.3 billion in assessed valuation. So what that means is, if anyone says, why is Ladue's tax rate lower than Webster Groves, for instance? Well, Webster Groves is a veteran community, not much in the way of businesses. So the people who live in Webster Groves have to, if they want to remain that veteran community, they're making a choice that they're going to pay higher taxes in that situation. While Clayton has the nice luxury that while they spend more per pupil than any district in St. Louis County, they can keep their tax rate relatively low because of that $1.3 billion in assessed valuation. So that just gives you a little context on kind of what's behind the numbers and why those tax levies differ. So overall, what's a bond issue? This is when, anytime a school district is going to come back to you and they're basically asking to borrow money, and these can only be used for capital improvement projects. So this is money that cannot be used for salaries. It can only be used for large-scale construction projects. Very typical that districts will have, especially larger districts, will have ongoing bond issues. As one completes or they pay off one, they typically will continue and they'll come back to the voters and just have ongoing, because as we all know as homeowners, it definitely costs money to keep your property up. We have a list of frequently asked questions, And one thing, and just a little bit, my communications director, we have kind of an end of the night activity that we're gonna ask you to do. And that really helps us drive those FAQs on the website as we start hearing from people. What are those key questions that you're hearing? What are you hearing from your neighbors? And we wanna make sure that we get that information out. So once again, in terms of, yes, it will be a complete rebuild of McGrath Elementary. We've now had two different architectural firms, both are the predecessors to Ittner, and now Ittner have both went through McGrath comprehensively, and it's been the consensus of all that it would be good money after bad to try to put money to renovate the McGrath property. What makes sense is a complete rebuild of that property, while, as you saw a little bit of it from Greg, at the Mark Twain property, that's gonna fall in line of about 80 to 85% brand new construction, but it did make sense for about 15% of that. There were some components of the facade, and there was some really good space in there that it just made sense for us to keep a portion of that as we did it. So in terms of figuring out your exact cost, we have a property tax calculator that we've linked to on our website. And what you have to do is first you have to, it'll take you to this, you gotta go to the St. Louis County Revenue website. And the key thing that you're looking for is getting your assessed valuation. And let me break that down a little. Did I skip one? So here's just an example. What we don't want people to do is get confused and plug in the whole value of your home. That's not how you determine your tax rate, so it will take you to your actual assessed valuation. In this example that we used, $250,000 home, your actual assessed valuation, it goes through a calculation, divide by 100, they times it by 0.19, which is the residential rate, and then you'll see it comes out to $47,500. You plug that in, and the person in that home would pay $223 a year. So we have this in terms of, you can go in and figure out exactly on your home. We have some examples. We just pulled these off of Zillow, and these are actual homes for sale. Well, now in Brentwood, they probably already sold, but they were for sale 2 days ago, 3 days ago. So you have, for instance, a $155,000 place over here on Oriole. They're going to pay $120 a year. Here's a $250,000 property for sale on Rosalie. That's going to be $226 a year. Home on Litzinger, $348,000. They're going to pay $261 a year for property. Home on Hatton, $439,500. That's going to pay $338 a year. And here's a home on Pine for $749,000, and they're going to pay $566 a year. So it gives you a little sense of the range, but we would encourage people to go on there and do that for your own home's assessed valuation, so you know exactly. We want to be fully transparent about this, so you can see exactly what that would cost you. I encourage you to break that down by a daily or a monthly rate, and think about what that would do for the district. So this is all on the website, that you can go through this process. We have that on there. So I can't tell you how to vote. I'm allowed to tell you, please vote. And we have the April 7th election. And I encourage you to follow our website. We have a specific link. We have a specific website that's just going to be about Proposition E. And we're going to be looking for many opportunities. The intent of tonight was just to kind of give you a sense of Prop E, but I would like to offer myself to anyone in here in terms of whether it's giving me a call, whether it's inviting me to a coffee at your home, if if I could come and talk about Proposition E at any time, I would love to do that. But we are going to have many, many different evening events, things out at the schools, a lot of opportunities to get even more in depth if you'd like to hear more specifics on the plans, any of those FAQs. It's going to be really an ongoing for the next 2 months, just opportunities that we can all engage around this process.